Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff. I'm a partner with Blink, and I've got 3 quick questions for you. Who likes the Muppets? Yes. Who likes good content? And who reads UX Booth? Not bad. So you've got some room on the 3rd one. This is Marli. Marli is the managing editor of UX Booth. She likes the Muppets, and she's a content strategist when she's not editing UX Booth. So with that, I'll present to you Marli.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here today. I love Seattle. Last time I was here was about 3 years ago, so I'm really excited to be back. And I want to talk today about our roles and the jobs that we have within the UX community. I was thinking about this a lot on my ride from the airport. I got into the cab drivers driving me along the way, and it suddenly occurred to me, this guy, when he goes to his mom's house for a barbecue in the summer, and his mom's friends show up, who have known him since he was a kid, and they're like, "Hey, Joe, what are you doing these days?" And Joe says, "Oh, I'm a cab driver." They think things like, they have follow-up questions. They go, "Oh, I bet you must know the city really well," or, "Hey, do you know the best way to get to blah, blah, blah," or "You must meet a lot of interesting people." And I kind of compare that to this past summer when I went to my mom's barbecue, and I saw her friends who haven't seen me since I was a kid, and they said, "So what are you up to these days?" And I said, "I'm a content strategist." And they said, "That's nice." And my mom, who's kind of like listening in, of course, like swoops in and says, oh, she writes for the internet. And I said, "Sure, we'll go with that. Yeah, I write for the internet. That's what I do." And it occurred to me, I have been working as a content strategist for a pretty long time now, and I struggle with how to define what I'm doing every day. And I've come up with a couple of pretty good elevator pitches. I'll say, "Oh, well, I help companies to figure out how to communicate best with their audiences," or "I help," it usually starts off with "I help," I help come up with a strategy that's going to guide all the things that the copywriters write, but I'm not a copywriter. And there are always those sort of, I do this but not this. It's the caveats, it's the explanations. There's no simple, "I'm a content strategist," and they say, "Wow, you must know the city real well." That doesn't come up. So I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been thinking about the fact that it's not just me. It's everybody in UX. It's the UX designers, it's the content strategists, it's the information architects, it's the UX unicorns, it's the developers who actually have a concrete role in UX, even though half the time I just think about them as the people who build stuff. So I decided it's time to play a game. We're going to start off today's talk with me doing my best Drew Carey impression, which this is it, by the way. I hope that was clear. Excellent. And we're going to play a little game called Whose Job Is It Anyways? Is that better, Drew Carey? So here are our choices. I've broken this down, compliments of a beautiful Venn diagram that I'll show you later that I did not come up with, but I've found it so many places across the internet that I'm afraid I don't even know who to give credit to. And I've come up with these 6 basic jobs that belong to people who work in UX. And I went onto LinkedIn, and I started looking up each of these jobs. And I was like, all right, this is a part of UX. I want to look for a job as a UI designer, user interface designer. I want to look for a job as an information architect. And I went through each of these 6 items. And I've picked out a few gems. So here's our first one. This person validates content delivery by developing and completing usability test plans, evaluating user flows and traffic patterns, studying user feedback, and coordinating with usability specialists. Now, if you had to guess, which of these 6 jobs do you think that described? Anybody? Shout it out.
Usability expert.
Usability expert? All right. And the answer is information architect! All right. That's okay. It's okay. We'll try again. This person is responsible for designing, developing, modifying, and implementing computer-generated and photographic artwork, images, and layouts for the web. Who does this? Visual designer, UI designer. Which one?
Visual.
Front-end developer! All right, how about this one? It's a little easier, maybe. This person will gather and synthesize business, brand, market, and user requirements and collaborate on user workflows, information architecture, and wireframes. Who does that? UI designer, usability expert, visual designer! And do one last one. This candidate will develop content and data information attributes and classification schemes, which I thought this one was pretty easy, right? Information architect? Content strategist? The answer is, any last guesses before we go there? Content strategist. But I will say, when I saw that one, I was like, oh, I'm looking up information architecture now, right? So when it comes down to it, and each and every one of these is from an actual job that I looked up on LinkedIn. So this is what our potential employers, this is what the people who get UX enough to want these job descriptions think we do. And it's a shit show.
It's the HR manager trying to put together.
Or it's the HR manager, sure. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, we're going to be able to do our jobs better when we can walk into a position knowing that other people value what we do. Knowing that when I do an interview with and the HR director says to me, hey, can you bring in your portfolio? And I say, well, pretty expensive portfolio, what are you looking for? And she says, oh, we need a flow. True conversation. And I said, great. What kind of flow are you looking for? And she said, oh, any flow. And I said, all right. Well, you're a big company. Are you looking for like an e-commerce flow? Are you looking for a specific set of interactions you want to see? What kind of flow are we talking about? Do you have an example of the kind of thing you're looking for? And she said, I can't show you other people's work. All right. I'm afraid I can't continue with the interview process then because I have no idea how to communicate with you. And what it comes down to is that's not the end person I'm going to be working with. But if I can't even figure out, if they don't even know enough about what they're looking for from me to be able to clarify the type of thing that they want to see from me, how are we going to work together in the actual day-to-day when stuff gets sticky in a project? Because we're going to have clients who don't understand exactly what they're looking for. We need to be able to communicate internally. And that kind of brings me to what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about where we've come from and where we're heading. See, we're in this really, really exciting time. We've evolved to this point where, I mean, you and I, some of us quite literally, are writing the books on how to do content strategy and building out the best practices on what it means to be a UI designer and do it well. If I say something up here today and you disagree with it, go online, write a blog post, send it out to Twitter followers, start talking about it with your friends or people at work, and I guarantee you that by the next conference, somebody else will be talking about the opposite side of that. And I may read it and go, oh, that does make sense. And whoever I got this idea from may see that as well. We could change, each and every one of you can literally change the shape of what it means to be one of these job titles. So, the problem is that's scary. And the bigger problem is I told you guys a little bit of a lie. When you read the pitch and you were like, I want to go see this talk because they're going to tell me how to find role clarity, I can't actually give you any role clarity. I lied. What I can do is help you identify some of the baseline requirements that are where we stand right now in terms of what each of these jobs do. The problem is they're evolving. They're evolving every day. And so next week, next month, next year, it won't mean the same thing. You won't need the exact same skill sets. And because of that, that's what leads to all of this role chaos and this role confusion. And I can't fix that up here today. But I can give you the tools to be able to walk into any situation with any combination of content strategists and information architects and UI designers and front-end developers who have any combination of these tools and combination of these skill sets. And I can give you the tools you need to be able to work with them. I want to address something really basic first, though, and that's the problem of silos. Raise your hand here if you've heard of silos. Keep your hand raised if you feel like you know a definition of silos. We've got one maybe. Two maybe. Excellent. That's because everybody has a different definition of silos. The one thing everybody seems to agree on is that silos cause breaks in communication. I believe that silos aren't necessarily a bad thing. Breaks in communication are a bad thing. But silos are a naturally evolving form. Here's how I see it. If I'm walking down the street and I'm learning things, right? This journey of life. I'm walking down my journey of life street. And I'm having all these different experiences. And then somewhere in the middle of the street, I see something that is really interesting to me. And I'm like, oh, this is content strategy. I'm interested in content strategy. And so I dig a little deeper. It's a very visual metaphor here. I'm digging a little deeper. I'm getting more and more invested in content strategy. Well, what that means is I'm not paying attention to some of those other broader elements. Now, I'm a content strategist. I have a specialization. That's great, but as a result, I am no longer up to date on absolutely everything else that's happening in all of those other little realms. Now, okay, we're talking silos, not holes. So let's say I was building up my knowledge as I was going. All of a sudden, now I'm in a silo. I believe that silos are essentially specializations. So the problem isn't that you find a specialization. The problem isn't that you are not completely up to date on everything else going on around you. The problem is when you don't communicate with the other specialties, when you don't communicate with the other people who have that other unique knowledge. So I say, down with silos. And I know I'm not the only one to be saying that. But what's more important to me is, you know what, take that back. I lied twice today already. I'm going to lie again. Not down with silos. We just have to build bridges. We just have to make sure that we don't end up working in these tiny little siloed areas without speaking to any of the other specialists and end up with a product at the end of the day that looks like the content fits really awkwardly in the design. Because the designers were building their design template without thinking about what content was going to go into it. And the developers had written up their scope assuming that that we were working off of something that they built before. And none of them communicated with each other and figured out that, oh, well, the content strategist had figured out that the best way to communicate with the user was going to be through video. But the UI designer was looking at the specs and said, well, the best interface is going to have a nice big banner across the top and no featured content at all. And the developer had built out the whole scope saying, look, I was given the constraints of timeline and budget, and so I know that the best thing I can do for this project is make sure that I'm pulling completely from libraries. All right, so now we've got a video that's supposed to fit into a space with no featured content without doing anything custom. Excellent. One more group activity here. Raise your hands if you have had this happen to you. Me too. I actually interviewed at a place once that I was very excited, 3-4 years ago. I was very excited about this. Big name company, I won't say where. I walked in, they said, oh, we have a whole floor of content strategists. And I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. So I go up and I walk down, I'm like, you know, and like Matilda in the library, like the elevator's part. And there's a whole floor of content strategists in individual cubicles looking at their computers because they get emails in their inbox when the UI designers who work on a different floor email them to say that the templates are ready for them to put the content into. And then when they're ready and done, they press a button and it emails the developers, oh, who work in a different city. And then they code it. We can't do this. It results in bad end products. You know, the stakeholders don't get to make their money. We, who have this responsibility and most of us love of the end users, don't see them happy. This is awful. All right, so enough about the bad stuff. This is the good stuff. This is that Venn diagram I promised you. I love this Venn diagram. I don't know where it came from initially. If one of you sees online that somebody specific should be getting credit for this, please tell me. I want to give credit where credit is due. But I love this because UX is the center of all of these different areas. So these are the areas, these are those 6 jobs that we looked at from LinkedIn. And I'm going to talk about each of these 6 briefly and just sort of give an overview of where it came from, where the employers tend to see it right now. And my goal is that when we leave here, you will each feel like you could explain what your job is and where it fits into one or many of these. And also, at the end, any of you who have written for UX Booth know that I'm really big on making everybody figure out their takeaways. And I want all of you to have some takeaways here. So we're going to talk about 4 different areas, 4 different tools that you can use when walking into any project, regardless of what your title is and regardless of what titles you're working alongside. So, kick off with visual design. To me, this is one of the easier, in fact, all 3, visual design, content strategy, and front-end development, to me those are the 3 easier ones to define because they're represented bigger here because they sort of have broader definitions. Visual design, if anything, is the most understood term within UX design. The downside is a lot of times it sort of gets used as a pejorative. People are like, oh, well, we have a UX designer and then we have a visual designer. You're like, they just color it in. Like, you know, I can't help but think that we're treating them as, like, Calvin and Hobbes, you know, he would sketch out all of the black and white, and then sometimes when he got too busy, he would send it off to a colorist. That's not what a visual designer is. And you know that deep inside you. And the reason I know you know that is because at some point in your lives, you've had a client say, oh, I need this to be bigger. And you've said, no, we're going to make it more prominent in visual design. Because that visual design, the colors and the imagery and the shapes and the formatting and the typography and all of that, that impacts what users see, where we draw their attention, how they know to interact with things. And yet we treat them as though, we often treat this job title as though it's somebody, a 4-year-old with crayons, right? What's also interesting to me is that I think maybe part of the reason it's gotten this pejorative thing is I think a lot of people who work in UX have gone home to Mom's Barbecue and said, oh, I'm a UX designer or I'm a UI designer, and been said, oh, so you color things? And they, no, that's a visual designer. You know, and I think it's like a reaction, a defensive sort of, you're talking about just the visuals, and I do more than that. But the visual designers do more than that too. What's really interesting to me about visual design is that a lot of employers look for one key element in their visual designers. It's not necessarily a background in UX. It's not an understanding of the user. It's Photoshop skills. Or now, as I think Photoshop is starting to get a little, people aren't loving it as much, fireworks. But any of these things, you know, they have to know their hex codes. They have to know their design. And so I think visual designers frequently come out of having been graphic designers or having been web designers before UX kind of became a thing. And now they're starting to call themselves visual designers, and they're being taught often along the way to value these UX elements. All right, number 2, content strategy. I'm a content strategist. I started doing content strategy about 6 years ago. But long before that, I was interested in why people use the language that they did and how they communicated and how things get dispersed over the web. And I found that that's true of many content strategists. We just sort of recently got these terms, but the work has been fairly consistent across the board. Content strategy first started being, well, the first content strategy department that the internet is aware of was at Razorfish in 1997. About a year later, A List Apart came out with a content strategy issue. That's when the fairly well-known definition of content strategy was written. That was Christina Halverson's article in 1998. But content strategy didn't really pick up until about 2010. And I have some theories as to why that was. Early 2000s, economy was bad. Almost no sort of new exciting terms were necessarily going to get hired because employers didn't have the space for a content strategist. What they did have space for was a copywriter. And a copywriter who knew something about the audience and was interested in doing research and learning more, great. So I think there are a lot of content strategists who sort of hid under this camo of copywriter for a while. And then I was talking to Nazar Bina, who if you don't know, you should definitely look up about this. And he said, well, when you think about it, content strategy kind of made it big the year the iPhone came out. 2010, all of a sudden the new iPhone came out, and we were putting content in multiple places. You needed a strategy for that. And I said, oh yeah, kind of do need a strategy for that. You know, I mean, you had like Anne Rockley had started the Rockley Group, but for a while they weren't calling what they were doing content strategy, but they were doing content strategy. And there were all of these different little groups in that were consulting groups or writing and research groups. Then all of a sudden, yeah, the iPhone comes out, Google's Panda update, 2011. That's what started pushing good content to the top of the search engines. All these things started coming together. Got content in two places, you need a strategy. And it's like content strategists started coming out of the woodwork. So this brings us to number 3, front-end development. When I looked at this, I almost thought maybe I want to rework this Venn diagram and take out development because, you know, developers, they build stuff, right? They're like, they've got the Legos, they're like making it happen, and then we fill in all the spaces, right, with the content and with the design and with the communication with the users and all of that, right? But that's not true. In fact, I really like where they've pushed this in, that development works with visual design to make a user interface. And I'm not sure about this development and content strategy together make usability, but I can kind of see where it's coming from. That, you know, content strategy, particularly when we're talking about like micro interactions, which we heard about yesterday, and help text, error messages, all of that, I can see content strategy, and then development, accessibility, and just thinking about sort of all those pieces and how they work together, I can see that working together for usability. I also really like this idea that front-end development is the parts of the website that the users interact with. It's the drop-down menus, the disabled buttons, the sliders, the contact forms. It's all of those pieces that we can see. It's the front, right? And as far as UX is concerned, people don't think of the developers helping with the design, but they do. I mean, these are the people who know the constraints. And when you've got a UI designer who's saying, this is what I would like to do, this is my idea, this is my image, they're often relying pretty heavily on the developer to say, well, here's what we can do. Here's what's in the library. Here's what we can customize. This is what we can build. And as a result, it's almost one of those situations where if you're looking at front-end developers and they could do their work without paying attention to the user, but a good front-end developer is going to be one focused on the UX. It's also important to remember that just as visual design can be easily distinguished and content strategy can be easily distinguished and development can be easily distinguished, the areas where they run together, we need to start thinking about the deliverables. Let me be a little more specific. All 6 of those jobs that we looked at have a focus on the user experience. They're very important to the user experience. They run together as a result. One way that we can very easily define this is separate from this, this is different from that, is by focusing on what they produce at the end of the day. And that's something that I found, if you're ever looking for a job and you're looking at these confusing as hell things on LinkedIn, look for what they're expecting you to produce. I have gotten jobs as a UX specialist, a UX strategist, even a UX designer. But if they're looking for Photoshop mock-ups, they're not going to be happy with me. I have decided not to apply for jobs as content strategist because they're looking for reports weekly on analytics. And I like analytics. I work with analytics. I am not your girl if you need somebody who's like digging deep and understands every little detail with Google Analytics. I am not an expert. Which brings us to information architecture. For those of you who were in Dan Klin's talk last with me, we heard a little bit about Richard Saul-Wurman. He was literally the guy who put the architecture in information architecture. He was an artist, an architect, an urban planner, and then he became a graphic designer. And basically, he looked at the data and the design one day and said, why don't we structure this the way that we structure a house? Why don't we put this so that we understand the foundation first and then build off of that? And as Dan mentioned, he then started the TED conferences. And he chairmaned the TED conferences for about 13 years. And that was actually referred to as a triumph of information organization. When you think about it, that's what he did. He found a new way, a different way to look at how we organize, how we disperse information. TED conferences, through video, through 20-minute segments, through quick explanations of very intense stuff. And the deliverables for an IA are sort of the blueprints for a website. It's our architecture. It's the sitemaps, and it's the navigation. So we've got UI design. This is one of the most difficult areas of UX to explain. User interface is the buttons, the menus, the layouts, the interface that we see, but those are all created frequently by visual designers, and they're built by front-end developers. So that gets confusing. And in fact, this is a common definition of user experience design. And this, to me, highlights why we overlap UI design and UX design so often. Because user experience design improves the usability, ease of use, and pleasure provided in the interaction between the user and the product. Okay, isn't that what we're all doing? Yes, which is why we're all doing UX design. But isn't that what a UI designer does? Well, yes, so isn't it the same thing? Well, not quite, but a lot of times when you do a search on LinkedIn for UI designer, what you come up with is UX designer roles. That's what they call them. And we just have to accept that, at least for now, a lot of people are using them interchangeably. I think if we can sort of wrap our minds around the idea that UI design creates an interface and UX design creates an experience, then we can think of UX design as a field and UI design as a job. But I'm going to need your help in pushing that around so that we can change the face of those explanations. The history of UI design can really be summarized as interfaces have existed for as long as programs have existed. But UI designers are essentially those graphic designers, those web designers who have started focusing specifically on UX. And I think that's important to remember as well. Everything has an interface. The question is whether or not it has a good interface, whether it has an easily usable interface. All right, and lastly, usability. This I had a tough one with. I looked up jobs on usability expert in LinkedIn and nothing came up. Apparently nobody is looking for usability experts. Apparently that's not really a job title. But it is work that we do. I'm not sure that I agree with this idea that it's, like I said earlier, that it's just sort of done by content strategy and front-end development, because I sort of think we all focus on usability. I think it's in there along with, accessibility isn't on this map because we all need to focus on accessibility, and user research isn't on this map. And maybe that's what should be there for usability, but it's certainly not done by content strategy and development together. And so there's so much more to UX design than I could even fit on this little map. So in the end, I stayed with usability, mostly because even though it doesn't have a job title, it does have some very concrete and clear descriptions. Jacob Nielsen broke it down into these 5 areas. This is his visual. Learnability asks how easy is it for the users to accomplish their the first time that they encounter the design. Efficiency is once they've learned it, how quickly and easily can they complete their task. Memorability is All right, now if they leave for months at a time and they come back, how much of it will they be able to remember versus need to pick up again? Errors, how many errors do they make? And maybe more importantly, how easily can we allow them to correct those errors? And satisfaction. How pleasurable is it? How delightful is it? How much do they actually enjoy rather than just put up with using that design? So we've got usability across the board. We've got our visual design, our content strategy, our front-end development. We've got UI and IA, which are also jobs. We've got user research sort of across there somewhere, peeking out. It's hidden. It's hidden. This is actually a three-dimensional visual. You just can't see the third dimensions behind. And we've got usability that doesn't have a job but certainly has a role. So, if we're all going to ensure that our projects are learnable, efficient, memorable, satisfying, and unlikely to cause errors, how are we going to work together? Well, like I said, I can't take away the confusion. I can't send you away with a 2-sentence job description that you can put on front of your desk. Although, oh my God, if somebody starts creating those, I will buy all of them. I'm totally seeing, and I want a share of the profits. Yeah, so we have to stay away from silos. We have to figure out how to work together. We have to figure out how to seek out these other specialists. And we need to be able to identify, hopefully it helped going through each of those jobs, where our specialties lie. I really like my job, if I haven't already made that clear. I actually love content strategy. I love the work I'm doing. I love the people I work with. I love meeting users, and I love finding new ways to communication. I love problem solving. I hate when I feel like my coworkers are stopping me from doing my job. And I think I hate it most of all because when I make myself sit down and think about it, I realize that it's probably more my problem than theirs. Because, of course, they're not going into work today being like, you know what would be fun? Marli said she really needs to get some user research done. I'm going to tell her that I'm the user researcher and I'm the only one who can be in there with the client. That'll be hilarious. What's much more likely is that the user researcher is thinking, geez, okay, I really love my job. I really love the people I work with. I really love meeting with the users. I've got a lot to get done today. You know what? I'm going to best be able to do my job if I'm the only person in the room with the user, right? That's not them trying to be a jerk to me. Maybe once in a while it is, but it's usually not. So, 4 things that we can do to make sure that is less likely to happen. And those are activities, exercises, soft skills, and tools. These will help us to ensure that we're not doing the same work that somebody else is doing unnecessarily. It will ensure that if we are working together with somebody on things, that we're not going in 2 different directions and having to then have wasted a bunch of time and probably redo work. It ensures that we are going to benefit from those other specialties that are working alongside us. And perhaps most of all, it ensures that when you've got a brilliant idea, which probably has a tiny little flaw in it because most of our ideas do, that somebody's able to point that out to you early on so that you don't waste a lot of time making it into a giant mountain that is just going to crumble. You know, if somebody helps you find the flaw early on, you fix that flaw and you create a beautiful mountain, and then it's a perfect project, or a great project at least. But if you go too far down a wrong path, or a path even with a tiny little flaw in it, because you're not communicating with the other people on your team, we all end up, losing. So, number 1, activities. I'm going to focus mostly on Gamestorming. This is one of my favorite books in the whole world, and I highly recommend that you find a copy of it. Or if you don't want to find a copy, look for the website, gogamestorm.com. Basically, Dave Gray, Sonny Brown, and James Macanufo got together and started thinking about why is it that grown-ups hate brainstorming meetings? Why are they so wasteful? Why do they not accomplish much? And they figured out that the problem was that there's either one person who's too loud, or there's somebody who's shy and doesn't want to speak up. There are all these problems that come up because of the hierarchy, essentially. And so what if instead we played games? And so they came up with sort of every brainstorming activity that they could find, and they all have specific goals and they have specific unique focuses. So that now, as a content strategist who's brought in with an IA who I don't know exactly what their specifications are, their specialties within IA are, and a UX designer who's sort of a UI designer and sort of a front-end developer and sort of a visual designer, but I'm not sure which ones he's actually good at and which ones he's just sort of being pushed into and is hoping I'll take on. All right, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We need a sitemap. I flip through my Gamestorming book. I find an exercise, or an activity rather, that is meant to help us come up with a good IA. And then we build it out together. And then everybody's skill sets will come out because they'll start helping in the ways that they are most comfortable doing. They'll start sharing the things that make them a valuable contributor to the process without any hierarchy and without any worry of, well, wait a second, are they expecting me to do this very specific? Nope. They're expecting you to help. They're expecting you to work together and use one of these activities. If you've got other activities from other places, bring them in. I use a lot from camp games from when I went to summer camp. I use a lot of ice-breaking things that were really pointless and stupid when we did them in orientation in college. But if you have an actual goal in mind, will not be mind-numbingly boring and stupid because you'll be actively trying to work together as opposed to just getting to know each other. So activities can come from anywhere. Use the ones that you've got. Repurpose them from when you were a kid or from your last job or from the retreat that you went to or from the conference that you were at. Pull them all together, make a binder, make a website, go to the Gamestorming website, whatever works for you. But activities are total hierarchy breakdowns. It's great. Next one, exercises. Now, I separate out exercises as separate from activities because an activity is like a game or something with a goal in mind. An exercise is more of a daily habit or process. The exercise that I'm really going to call out here is pair programming. This is something that developers use in Agile where two people are working on one piece of code. I have amended this to work for people with different job titles. So there's a lot of talk all the time about whether content should come first or design should come first or mobile should come first or all these different come firsts. So when we're starting to build out an original flow or even a first round of wireframes for something, I pair program. I sit down with somebody who has a different focus and we each take a stab at how this could look. Either I write out sample content and messaging for a page while the designer's building out a layout for a different page, and then we swap, and I create content that will fit in that layout, and the designer creates a layout that will fit with the messaging I gave them, and then we look at it together and we say, oh, wow, that worked really well. Oh, I like this. And then that helps us to figure out, I had left that out. I hadn't thought about that. Okay, so now we can create a new layout with messaging that are intended to work together. So yeah, other exercises like that, anything that is helpful in getting somebody to work hand in hand, to see what you do and how you do it, very valuable. Also kind of opens up those creativity elements that we were hearing about this morning, all of those different, seeing things from a different perspective, trying new things that you wouldn't otherwise try. It's good stuff. All right, number 3, the soft skills. Nobody likes the soft skills. Everybody's like, oh, I'm great at Photoshop, I'm great at coding. That's all I need. It's not all you need. You need to be compassionate, and you need to have humility. The 3 magic words to my mind are I don't know. About 5-6 years ago, I walked into a room, one of my first projects as a content strategist. They didn't know that. And I was coming in as the expert. So I come in, they've sent me away, they've given me information, they've asked me to come back to present a strategy. So I come in and I'm all set to present a strategy, and I'm not like a half a slide in before this marketing guy who was maybe 15 years older than me cuts in and starts talking about how this is what he thinks we should be doing and blah, 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 blah. And at first, I was kind of cowed. I was like, all right,
all right, well, he's 15 years older than me. He's probably been working at this job a long time. I guess I should listen. Clearly he knows a lot of stuff that I don't. And then I was thinking about it, and I was like, wait a second. He doesn't know the stuff that he asked me to do instead. He doesn't know the things that I learned, the things that I found out from my personal experiences. We have led different lives. I have different information to share, and I was asked to come in here to share it. And I really hope that another 10 years from now, or even now, or 20, 30 years from now, no matter how much experience I have, if somebody comes in who is fresh out of college, I really hope I'll be able to look at them and say, you learned things in college that are different from what I learned in college. You have experiences that I have not experienced. You have a perspective worth sharing. Because you do. It doesn't matter how long or how little time you've spent in this field. If you haven't spent much time in this field, it's because you were doing something else. If you came to this from a different field, you have things to share and a perspective worth hearing. So that's the humility side, actually, is remembering that everybody else has something worth sharing. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're 15 years older than us or 15 years younger. It doesn't matter if we know it's their first day on the job or their last day on the job. They have a perspective that we haven't heard. The other side to that is compassion. When it comes to developers, I have a really bad habit of just assuming that because they know these languages, Python and Ruby, that I don't know, that I'm very reliant on them for information. As a result, I kind of forget sometimes that there's information I have that they don't. I completely forget, and I'll get a mock-up that has the messaging totally wrong. And to me, it just seems so obvious. No, that's not the same thing that I was looking at. Duh. And I have to remember that they don't work with messaging every day. The developer, even though they know tons of stuff that I will never know, he doesn't know the stuff that I think is easy. He doesn't know that he's not a grammar nut. He doesn't know that the punctuation actually matters so that we can be consistent across headers. He doesn't look at those editorial style guide things that I've spent so much time doing that just seems obvious. And so I have to remember that when I'm explaining something, it doesn't mean I need to condescend, but it does mean that I should focus on clarity. And it means that when I ask questions, I should never start with why, I should start with what. Because when you ask somebody, why did you do that, it sounds like an attack. It sounds like you're assuming that there is something bad in it. If you ask, what gave you the idea for this? Or what are you trying to showcase? Or even what can I do to help you? You'll learn a lot more. Ultimately, you'll get the answer to why. And you won't piss off as many people. And finally, the tools that we can use. The concrete tools. These are just a few ideas to find shared spaces. The cloud, it's a big deal, right? If you've ever tried to send a Microsoft Word document across 3 or 4 different people on a team to get edits together, you know how painful that can be. So I don't care if you're using an editorial calendar, although I personally love them and find that they're a great way to keep designers, developers, everybody on the same page. You basically create a just project calendar that looks like an editorial calendar, not with deadlines, but with working on pieces. I don't care if you're creating a giant checklist that everybody contributes to. I don't care if you're using Basecamp or Dropbox or Todoist or one of the list things that's meant to be for couples, or I don't care what you're doing. I don't care if it's visual. On a project I'm working on right now, we set up a giant whiteboard the other day, and we made 4 columns. And column number 1 was not yet started. Column number 2 was in progress. Column number 3 was ready to present. And column 4 was signed off on. And then we gave each of us a side column. And then we took everything that we're trying to get done right now and put it on individual sticky notes. So if I'm working on the presentation and I'm all done but it still needs to go by the designer, I move it from mine to theirs. And then at a glance you can see oh, maybe I shouldn't ask Marli to do 5 more things because she's already got 3 on her in progress and 10 in her not yet started. You know, you can see, hey, that's been sitting on your in progress for about a week and a half. Is everything okay with that piece? You can figure out, and it means, you know, it doesn't take the place of meetings or scrums, but it is a great way not to have to interrupt people 15 times a day to say, what are you working on now? Are you working on that piece that I was going to work on with you? Are you going to get to that soon? When should I? You know, at a glance, I can look and say, oh, still in not yet started. Pro tip to that is also get the team as a whole to agree on a priority list. And I don't mean high priority, medium priority, low priority. I mean if there are 30 things on your list, they get numbers 1 through 30. And then if something new comes up, make it 1.5 if it's the next most important. And again, that way at a glance, I can see, oh, I'm working on this thing with Joe. He's got, over in his in progress thing, 4 numbers that are ahead of the thing I'm going to work on with him. Okay, I'm not going to hold my breath on that. I'm going to start on something else. And that's where I leave you. These are my 4 takeaways. And thank you very much for listening. And we're just about done now, and I know everybody probably wants to get to lunch, but if anybody has a question or two, I'm happy to see what I can do. Thank you. Yeah?
Have you tried to come up with your own definition or UX strategy?
Ooh. Yes. My working definition right now is that it's, so I usually describe it in context of content strategy, that the UX strategy is literally taking as big or as small of a section of the customer journey, so as small as from the time they get to our site to the time that they finish their purchase, or as big as from the first time they hear about us to the day that the company closes or they die. You know, but it's essentially looking at a segment of a person's experience, of an audience's experience, and determining what the touch points are going to be along the way and where we can impact them and create an experience for them along the way. And then the way that tangents into content strategy is that content strategy is exactly the same thing, but with a focus on what content are we providing them at what times. Yes?
How do you define people's roles if you don't have the luxury of having a million people?
Yeah. Yep.
Because that's where all the craziness comes from.
Oh, absolutely. I think that comes down to 2 things. It sort of depends on the company and the project, but you have a choice. You can either say, I am a person filling these roles, so I am doing the IA and the content strategy, or I am doing the UI design and the visual design, and you can consider those 6 elements. I would say 7 because I really do think I need to find a way to fit user research into that Venn diagram. But you can say these are the 7 items that we want to make sure that we're covering, and this person is responsible for these elements of them. The other option is, of course, within each of those, there are content strategists who are experts at analytics. There are other content strategists like me who focus much more on branding and vocabulary. But so you can certainly say, I have this role, I'm also taking care of some elements of blah, 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 blah. And then the final thing would be to say, in an ideal world, every project is covering all of those, but they don't always. So you could just say, like, we don't have a front-end developer on this project. Our UI designer is doing a little bit of development, but basically then we're passing it off to the client. We're not doing the front-end development.
I actually have an interesting, rather than have the Venn diagram,
Mm-hmm.
it's a pyramid. And
Ooh.
so when you talk about the research comes in the top bottom of the foundation, kind of gradually gets all the way up to the
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's really awesome. A colleague of mine made it.
If you're sharing it, then send it my way. Yeah. Anything else? All right. Enjoy lunch, everybody.